Okay, so we're on Chafdal and Ahmed Bays, about 12 lines from the top. Ibaylahu. The last word on the line is Ibaylahu. It's 24b2 at the beginning in the article 24b2. Ibaylahu mahu lahalos misharos liyochsin. Are we allowed to elevate someone if they were listed as a Kohen in a document, in a shtar, and it says that he's a Kohen? Can we say, oh, that means he's a Kohen? So hey chidam. So what's the case that we know from a shtar, from a document, that he's a Kohen? Ani plani Kohen chasamti aid. If it says, so and so a Kohen as a witness, meaning if someone signed as a witness and they signed, Aaron ben Elazar ben Aaron a Kohen, aid as a witness. Man kamasayid eluya. Who's testifying about the witness that it's true? Lo tricha diksibe ani ploni kohen labisi manami ploni v'chis musadi. So it must be the case where I, so and so, who's a Kohen, borrowed $100 from someone else. Meaning he wrote in the document that he borrowed. It's an IOU that he wrote, and in it he wrote his name, that that he is a Kohen, and then the witness is signed underneath him. What's the halacha? Amana shebeshtar kamisade. Are the witnesses only testifying to the transaction in the shtar, which is the loan of $100 bucks? Odilma akula milso kamisadi, or are they testifying on everything in the shtar? Part of the thing written in the shtar is that so and so is a Kohen. Rav Huna Rav Chisda. There's a machlokes in Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Chadam or maalin, v'chadam or ein maalin. One said we can elevate someone to a Kohen if it was signed like that, and one doesn't. So probably the machlokes is on that point. Do we assume that they're testifying about every detail in the shtar, or only testifying about when they sign their names on the shtar? They only testifying about the transaction, but they don't need to look into the fact if he's a Kohen or not. And we pass, and the halacha follows the opinion that we do not make them a Kohen because it was in the shtar like that. Ibaylahu. Another question. Malu lahalos minesius kapayim liyochsin. Can we elevate someone from the fact that they duchen? They say berachos kohanim yivarecha Hashem yishmerecha during davening. Could we say if someone goes up for that, they're a Kohen? You could ask whether or not we elevate, which we said is one of the ways of explaining the machlokas in our Mishnah between Rabbi Huda and Rabbana, from the fact that a Kohen, that someone is eating truma. Is that enough to say, oh, he must be a Kohen? So either way of what you hold, we can raise the question. According to the opinion that if someone eats truma, we could assume he's a Kohen, it's still a question. Truma is a very serious matter. And if someone who's not a Kohen eats truma, he gets a death penalty. So if he eats truma, which is relatively strict because of the death penalty, or will I say that there's no prohibition against the non-Kohen duchen? There's a mitzvah saseh that Kohanim are the ones who duchen. So from the fact that there's a positive commandment for Kohanim to duchen, we infer that non-Kohanim don't duchen. But it's not actually a negative commandment. So if a non-Kohen would duchen, well, we don't do it as a Kohen. Right. We use those psukim, but we don't do it as a Kohen. There were weddings. I don't know if I've ever seen it, but there used to be. Oh no, I saw it at a bris, that they had a Kohen go up and say the berachos kohanim to a kid at the bris. I saw it about a year last summer, and
bris I never saw, but a wedding.
I've heard about it at weddings, and then I realized I saw it last summer at a bris.
But is this? I mean, why is this brought up? Is because somebody signed their name as a Kohen on the start? Is that supposed to lend it more credence? I mean,
no. So we want to know because our Mishnah was talking about if someone comes and says I'm a Kohen, you believe that he's a Kohen and you don't let him marry a divorcee, but we don't assume he's really a Kohen. And then we said in Machlokas in the Mishnah between Rabbi Huda and Chachamim is if someone's eating truma, is that enough to assume that he really is a Kohen or not? So now we're asking a bunch of details of if someone does a certain act which Kohanim do, is that enough to assume he's a Kohen? That's what the Gemara is going to be talking about for a while now. So if he duchens, is that enough to be a Kohen? So even if eating truma is enough to be a kohen, that's because truma is very strict. So he wouldn't risk eating truma unless he really was a kohen, because he doesn't want to incur a death penalty. But to duchen, if you're not really a kohen, it's not the right thing, but there's not even lashes. It's not even a negative commandment. So maybe the fact that someone can duchen is not a good enough evidence that he's a kohen. We're already on 24b3 here. Odilma loshna. Or maybe it doesn't matter. You do something like a kohen, you're a kohen. And tiboy lamanda amar ein mal. And even according to the opinion that someone who would eat truma is not enough to assume he's a kohen, hani mili truma de misachla betzina, because truma is eaten privately in your house. Avon minesius kapayim de farhesia, but the duchening is something which is done in public. Ilav kohen hu kuli hay lo machtzef inish nafshe. But for duchening, which is public, he wouldn't pretend to be a kohen in public if it wasn't true. It's a lot of chutzpah to pretend to be someone you're not. I mean, obviously nowadays we hear these people who pretend to be a Native American or pretend to be a person of color, and it ends up that it's not true. But
in Israel, a couple who pretended to be Jewish rabbis.
Or there's people who there are people who pretended to be Jewish, and the whole thing isn't true.
Yeah.
And big rabbis and they're missionaries, whatever. But
right.
So at least in regard to this question, someone wouldn't duchen because it's publicly, it's easy to be called out on if someone knows it's not true. So the fact that it's in public gives it more credibility that eating truma, which is a private thing, dilma loshna, or maybe it doesn't matter whether it's public or private. Rav Chisda Rav Avina, there's a machlokes between Rav Chisda and Rav Avina, chadamar maalin v'chadamar ein maalin. One says if they duchen, we could say that he's a kohen, and one says no, we do not elevate him to be a kohen, and we also paskin here that he's not a kohen. Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak l'Rabba. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to Rabba, "Ma'ula halos minesius kapayim liyochsin." What's the halacha from the question we just asked? Can we elevate someone to be a kohen just from the fact that we know that he duchens? Amar le plukta Rav Huna Chisda Rav Avina. It's a machlokes Rav Chisda Rav Avina, like they weren't to say. Hilchos amai. So he says, so how do we paskin? Amar le ana masnisi yadana. I know a mishnah or a brisa about it. The Tanya we learned in the brisa. Rav Yossi Omer Gedola Chazaka. Chazaka is very strong or very great. So chazaka is, if we don't know how to do something, a chazaka is a presumption. Now, some chazakas are in terms of, let's say, property ownership. If someone lives on property and acts like the owner, we see him doing it for 3 years, that's a chazaka. We don't have, true evidence, but based on the fact, we can presume that he's the owner. So chazaka is very powerful. Shenamar, because there's a pasuk in Nehemiah or Ezra. Where is it? Ezra. It's a very long pasuk. There's some very long pasukim in Ezra and Nehemiah. B'nei Hakoni, b'nei Chivya, b'nei Hakotes, b'nei Barzilai, and from the sons of the Kohanim, the children of Chavia, the sons of Kotes or Hakotes, and the sons of Barzilai. Asher lakach mibnos Barzilai hegaladi isha, that Barzilai, the Galadi, they these families married into the family of Barzilai Galadi, Vikari al Shemam, and they were called by their name. They wanted to be written as people who had yichus as Kohanim. They wanted to be listed in the records as Kohanim, the yichus records, but it wasn't found. So normally the word vayigal is to redeem. In this case, vayigal means they cut them out or they stop them from being Kohanim. Vayomer Hatirsha lahem, and Hatirsha, who was Nehemiah, Asher lo yochel mikodesh hakarashim adamot kohen l'urim u'letumim, that they're not allowed to eat from the kodesh and the holies until a kohen will stand with the urim and the tumim. So the urim and tumim is the choshen. So inside the choshen, there seemed to be some type of special parchment that had some things written in it, and with their special name of Hashem, and that made the urim, that made the choshen light up when the kohen gadol would ask him a question. or something else. I think the Rabbi says in Chumash that somehow, and this takes away the thing about the lottery, but it had the map of Eretz Yisrael already with the portions of which Shevet would get which portion, and that's how it lit up when they were portioning Eretz Yisrael. I think that opinion is not a simple opinion to understand. And because that was one of 5 things that didn't exist in the Beis HaMikdash, in the second Beis HaMikdash, and Nehemiah and Ezra, they brought up people to the second Beis HaMikdash, so that meant you can't be Kohanim. It's like you can come when hair grows on my hands. Well, hair doesn't grow on our hands, so it's not going to happen. So this was a way of telling you can't eat the Kodesh HaKadoshim until the Kohen has the Urim V'Tumim. And since the Urim V'Tumim didn't exist in the second Beis HaMikdash, he was telling him you can't be Kohanim. So Amar Lahem, he was saying you can stay with your status quo. So he said chazaka is presumption. Sometimes chazaka means status quo. Let's say you're shechting with a knife, and then you check the knife, and it had a nick in it. Can we assume that it was kosher until just now, that it had the status quo, or can we assume that the nick happened immediately after you checked it last? We follow the status quo or not? What did you eat while you were in Babylonia in the exile? You ate truma. Here too, now that you came to Eretz Yisrael, you can continue to eat truma, but you can't serve as kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, and you can't eat parts of korbanos. Maalin b'kodesh minesius minesius. And if we hold that if the fact that someone's duchens, we allow them to, we can elevate them to being a Kohen. Hani kevin the parsi yadayu asi lasiknu, because they used the duchen. We would conclude and say that they are Kohanim. So if we would elevate them to Kohanim, the fact that we say that you can't be a Kohen doesn't count, because other people will see that they're duchening and will say, oh, they're really Kohanim. So from this Brisa about Chazaka, we must conclude that we are not able to elevate someone to be a Kohen from the fact that we see them duchen. So the Gemara says, Shani hacha derechas kayu. No, this is different because their Chazaka has a deficiency in it. Meaning it's true that we never said they're Kohanim. But for these particular families, even though people will see them duchening, they know that those families, there's something wrong with them, or there's a potential. We can't assume they're Kohanim. The ilo temahachi, because if you don't say this, lamand amar maalin truma liyuchsin, kevan dachli b'truma asi lasiknu, because according to the opinion that if you see someone eating truma, that's enough to make him a kohen. Hatirsha, which is Nehemiah, said they could continue eating truma. So the fact that they're eating truma, people would say, oh, they're kohanim. So without the question of duchening.
Was there evidence that these men who married the daughters of
Barzillai,
that there was a question about their?
So a lot of Kohanim and Leviim and a lot of Jews intermarried in Bavel. In Bavel.
No,
this is Ezra.
Barzillai was in the desert.
Barzillai was the time of David.
Oh wait! Oh, I'm
so
it. Yeah.
I don't know if this is the same Barzillai, but Nehemiah is talking about in the time at the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, and they married people of Barzillai. Whether it's that same Barzillai or not, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But the question is, were those women of kosher Jewish lineage and elevated Jewish lineage? Because we learned last week and the week before about Mila Asur B'Yochsin.
Okay.
Because to be a Kohen, they had to check the four mothers, so they didn't really want to make Kohanim marry people. They didn't want someone who was eligible to marry a Kohen. They wanted them to marry a Kohen. So a lot of people in Bavel, they married people who were converted or not really converted. And so they were no longer they married people who really, so they couldn't continue to be Kohanim anymore. We're not saying that they're halalim, but they couldn't do the avoda because maybe they weren't kosher enough Kohanim. So even though Hatirsha, which is Nehemiah, was allowing them to eat truma, everyone knows that because of chazaka, they're allowed to eat truma, but we were not allowed to conclude anything else about their kohen status. So there
Is
is
this related to the where it says that people were
is Yahadim. Many people became Jewish because
yeah,
they were afraid.
yeah.
No, that wasn't because. So in Megillah, because it was good to be a Jew. I'm paraphrasing Mel Brooks, but at the time after Mordechai, it was good to be a Jew. So people wanted to be Jewish because it was good to be a Jew.
Right.
Just like in the time of Shlomo was so rich and Jews were so powerful, it was good to be a Jew. But here, it wasn't because it was just because of assimilation that they were intermarrying. It wasn't necessarily that people wanted to. Now, let's say later at the time of the Hashmonaim, King Herod was trying to use his marriage to say, "Oh, I'm a very important person that I married the Hashmonaim family. I am a Hashmonai." So that there is, so that's similar to what you're saying. Would they have done that? But there's no in Bavel. It was just because of assimilation. So here, Hatirsha allowed them to continue eating truma. So according to the opinion that if we see someone eating truma, we could assume they're Kohen. How could he let them eat truma? The fact they eat truma. So it must be that because of the chazaka, we could allow them to eat truma, but we're not allowed. Everyone knew that they had some potential issue with their family lineage, so we couldn't assume they're Kohen. So then the Gemara says, "Ve'alamai gedol chazaka." So then we turn the page to Chaf Hamid Aleph. So then what is the greatness of their chazaka that they're allowed to eat truma if they weren't really Kohanim? So the Gemara answers, because when you're in Bavel, does the produce that grows in Bavel, is there a biblical truma from it? No, biblical truma is only in Eretz Yisrael. So they were only eating rabbinic truma. So okay, so it's not the end of the world if a not Kohen eats it. But now that they come back to Eretz Yisrael and we let them eat real truma, there's a big difference. So we might think that we would not allow them, that we shouldn't allow them to eat truma d'oraisa, because that's doing more than what they did before. It's a higher status than what they did before. But no, he said gedol chazaka. Since your chazaka was these families were always eating in Babel. Until now, we'll allow you to eat truma, even though we don't know that you're for sure Kohanim, and we won't let you do the avon. Welcome. Did you just get here? Oh, you've been here already. Okay, welcome.
Up to the wedding. In Boston.
Here a week early. Okay.
I couldn't wait to see you.
Or you could say, you want a Gemara?
No. I just want to know for tomorrow for the new sector you have.
Yeah, getting. Yeah, the big one.
No, I don't need it for now. I'm going to come in tomorrow and do the daf yomi.
It's over.
It's over here.
Here, getting one.
Yeah, because I went to buy one, they didn't have it.
I guess that means people are learning it.
Well, he says he's getting in 3 tomorrow. I said I'll come back tomorrow, but he only said.
Yeah, fine.
I go online.
I can't do that.
Oh,
How are you?
Or, so chazaka is great. So even though they were only eating rabbinic truma, now we allow them to eat biblical truma at a biblical level. Or you could say chazaka is great, even though they only let them have rabbinic truma even now in Eretz Yisrael. They didn't allow them to eat real truma d'oraisa. So according to Rashi, I think Rashi mentions. Yeah. So we mentioned before several times that there's a big machlokus Rishonim. What are you biblically required to take truma and truma off it? One opinion is only tirosh v'yitzar, only from oil and wine. So for grapes and olives. That's the many Rishonim, and Rashi's opinion is more than that. It's the grains, the 5 grains: wheat, rye, oat, barley, and spelt, and oil and wine. And some opinions are those things plus the other species of Eretz Yisrael, which would include figs and dates and pomegranates. I think everything else we already mentioned olives, and we already mentioned barley and chitasora and geffen, the te'ina rimon. Yeah. And then there's another opinion, which the Rambam's opinion is all all that stuff plus anything that grows from a tree. So let's say if there would be apple trees, which I don't think apples are indigenous to Eretz Yisrael, but things that grow on trees are also, but you also have to take truma midiraisa. So Rashi's opinion here is that it's the grains and olives and wine. So, but let's say buxer, we don't look at that as a delicacy, but let's say buxer or oranges that they grew, according to Rashi, that's not biblically mandated to take truma off of. So according to Rashi, they would let them eat truma off of those types of things. But wine or olives or is it grains that you can make bread or matzah out of, though they were still not allowed to eat, because there's a death penalty in case they're not really kohanim. We can't let them eat them. And when we say that if we see someone eating truma, we elevate them to being a kohen, that's only when it's when they're eating biblical truma. But when it's only eating rabbinic truma, and you could tell they're eating an orange, they're not eating olives, so we wouldn't elevate them to a truma. But if so, alamai gdol chazaka. So then what's the great shakes about the chazaka there? They weren't allowed to eat truma d'iraisa before, and they're still not allowed to eat truma d'iraisa. So how do we see from what Nehemiah, aka Hatirsha, told them? How do we see the great power of status quo of chazaka? So the alpha got the equal mixture truma d'iraisa lo gazrina. Because we know from Pirkei Avos, asu siag la Torah, we have to make a fence around the Torah. We know that only midiraisa, you're not allowed to have meat of red meat of an animal with milk, but chicken with milk you're allowed to have midiraisa, because it says don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. So a kid means a baby sheep, a baby goat, a baby cow. It doesn't mean a chicken. But midirabanan, they said you can't have chicken and meat also, because if we would allow you to have chicken with milk, you might have steak with milk. So that's Chachamim make a siyag. They make a fence to strengthen Torah, to make sure we don't, by accident, violate the Torah. They say you can't hold a pen, you don't move a pen on Shabbos, it's muktzah. If you hold a pen, you might start writing business transactions or other things. Writing itself is a malach. So the Chachamim forbid things that aren't forbidden by themselves, but in order to strengthen the Torah law, that we don't by accident, or maybe not so by accident, violate the Torah law. So since we don't allow them to drink truma wine or bread or olives or oil, maybe we shouldn't let them even have truma oranges, because if we let them have truma oranges, maybe they'll take truma olives. So no, the chazaka is big enough that we don't make a gzera, even though normally we would make a gzera, a fence, a decree to make a fence to strengthen Torah observance and make sure that people don't by accident eat truma that they shouldn't be eating. Question?
No, I'm thinking of the joke about the kind of kids said about dancing with women. It leads to
No.
same thing.
According to many opinions, though, you couldn't have any physical contact with a woman that would be erotic, even though there's nothing more than just touching hand to hand or hand to something else. So, lahavdil, Dancing with the Stars.
No, but I'm even talking about with your wife.
Okay. All right. You're talking about to have a conversation. Right. Okay. With truma d'iraisa lo achol. So how come we don't let these families eat truma d'iraisa, biblical truma? The pasuk says they can't eat kodesh hakadashim. So there's different levels of what kohanim could eat. One thing is truma, but stricter than truma is parts from the korban. The parts that are of a korban that are only for a kohen are even more holy than truma, and it's a much stricter penalty because to eat those than for a non-kohen to eat truma, even though both are pretty serious sins. No one nowadays eats truma because we're not sure that anyone's really a kohen. So they don't eat truma. I have to be careful. Rabbi Rubenstein, the posek at Keren B'Yavneh, who gives a hechsher on some of the olive and pickle stuff that's being processed next door. So the people who are kohanim, they give them truma oil and they burn it in their menorah on Hanukkah. because they don't eat it. So there's not a death penalty in case they're not really Kohen. We don't let non-Kohanim use it, but the people, if they get the first aliyah and they're Kohanim, they would let them use the oil to burn it because you don't eat it. So, but from the pasuk, it makes it sound like they're only not allowed to eat karbanos, kodesh hakadashim, but it sounds like truma d'oraisa they are allowed to eat, but truma d'oraisa ochel. So hachi kamar, the Gemara says no. This is what the pasuk in Ezra means. Lo b'midi d'ikra kodesh below. They're not allowed to eat things that are called kodesh. T'ksiv v'chazor li'ochel kodesh. A zar means stranger, but in context it means a non-Kohen is not allowed to eat holy. Holy means truma. Below b'midi d'ikra kachim, and not things that are called kachim. Kachim means holy things. That means karbanos. The daughter of a Kohen. So her father was a Kohen. She grew up as a Kohen. She was eating truma as a kid. Once she gets married to a non-Kohen, she's no longer allowed to eat kachim. We learned in a brisa, she's not allowed to eat parts that were separated for a Kohen from korbanos. So even though we wanted to read Kodesh Kadashim together, the Gemara is telling us that we read Kodesh as Truma and Kadashim as Korban parts. So that was an attempt from that brisa to show that the halacha is that if someone eats, if someone duchens, we do not elevate them to a Kohen, but we rejected it because we say because they're allowed to eat Truma, we're still not worried that we're going to elevate to the Kohen because everyone knew that these families, there was some issue. So no one would elevate them. But in general, so you couldn't bring a proof from this brisa. Ashma. Now we're about 15 lines down from the top of Chaf Hamad Aleph. We're on 25.82. Let's learn from this brisa that if someone duchens, they're allowed to, we can presume, we could say that they're a real Kohen. Chazaka l'kuhuna minesius kapayim b'Bavel. What's the chazaka? That thing, if we see someone doing something, it means that they're a Kohen. Minesius kapayim b'Bavel. If in Bavel they could duchen, v'achilas chala b'Surya, and they eat chala in Surya. Now chala here doesn't mean chala. Chala means that when you make a dough, you have to give a portion of the dough to a Kohen. So in Surya, which is could be parts of modern day Syria, but Surya was captured by David HaMelech, and because it was what's considered a private conquest, kibush yachid, it's not really Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi says that this opinion, the Gemara at this point is assuming that that Surya did have a status of Eretz Yisrael. So this challah was real challah that only a real Kohen could eat. And it's the reason that the duchening in Bavel works is because in Bavel there were important batei din, and they would check and make sure that people had the proper yichus of what people were thinking. So Ketani Mias, V'chiluk Matanos Bekrachem, and the distribution of Kohen gifts in big cities. So when you would shecht an animal, you would give certain parts of the animal to a Kohen. Now it's not a real truma. It doesn't have a status of truma. If a non-Kohen would eat it, it's not a problem, but these are one of the gifts that Kohanim get. But it doesn't have sanctity. So if it was in a city, it's possible that other travelers from other places would come by. So if you would, when people were distributing these gifts to Kohanim in a city, if someone wasn't a Kohen, they're worried that maybe a visitor is there and would recognize him as a fraud, as not being a Kohen. From the fact that they are collecting it in the big city, it shows that you could assume that they really are a Kohen. So Ketani Mias Minesius kapayim. So this brisa though mentions that if they duchen in Bavel, we could assume they're a Kohen. So my lav liyuchsin. So when it says that the chazaka is a Kohen, let's say that we're elevating them to be a Kohen miyuchas, that of a Kohen of fine, unquestioned pedigree. So the Gemara says lo letruma. We only assume that they're a Kohen to let them eat truma. And again, this would mean truma d'Rabbanan because we're talking about in Bava. I don't think it means that if they go up to Eretz Yisrael, we could say that they can eat in Eretz Yisrael. This is lo truma. We only allow them to eat truma, but we wouldn't say that they're yichus is of high level that they could be a kohen in the base of Mikdash. But the Gemara says, but duchening was one chazaka, another chazaka was eating challah. But we know that we only allow real kohanim who have good yichus, good pedigree to eat challah. So when we say that they're allowed to, if they duchen, we assume that they're real kohen. It should mean that they're real kohen, just like the kohen who was eating challah in Surya. So the Gemara says, "Lo achilas challah gufa truma." We only are comparing them to eating challah to eating truma. But the question is, challah is a form of truma. If we allow them to eat challah, of course we allow them to eat truma. So what do you mean eating challah allows them to eat truma? How's it any different? So the Gemara says, "Kesavar challah bisman azed rabbanan," because this brisa held that separating challah nowadays is only rabbinic. Truma d'oraisa, but separating truma is a biblical rule. So what's the difference? And if we allow them to eat rabbinic challah, people might elevate them and allow them to eat biblical truma, which is stricter because on a biblical level. And so why would we assume that challah is different than truma? That challah would be d'Rabbanan, but truma b'diraisa. As Rav Huna turned the tables around, Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, to the Rabbana. And we're gonna say what that was a little bit below. But we have a different, we're gonna try to bring Chemda. We're gonna try to bring a different proof. Now, Ashma, we learned in the Brisa, Chazakal Kahuna, minesius kapayim v'chil gronos b'Eretz Yisrael. We can presume that someone is a kohen if they duchen in Eretz Yisrael, or if they're taking truma as it's being distributed from granaries in Eretz Yisrael. So people, when the food entered the granary, it was considered done, and at that time they would have to separate truma. So if someone they were giving from there, is everything okay? Okay, no problem. And also, if they were duchening or separating, collecting from the distribution of truma in Syria and anywhere that the messengers from Rosh Chodesh would reach. So some places into Bavel, not too far into Bavel, but if it was places where messengers from Rosh Chodesh reached, that's considered parts of Eretz Yisrael. In our language, we would say the places that only have to keep 1 day of Yantif. Because the messengers would say when Rosh Chodesh was, so they knew when Yantif was, and they only had to keep 1 day of Yantif. Uvavel, excuse me, minesius kapayim raya avalo chilagranos. So minesius kapayim raya avalo chilagranos. So duchening is a proof, but not distributing stuff, the grains at the granaries. Because in the places where the messengers came, it wasn't necessarily Eretz Yisrael. So in those places, Truma wasn't the Eraisa. Ubabel Kasuria, and the halacha of Babel is like Surya. And Rashi says over here that not this brisa holds that Surya is rabbinic. In this case, we're assuming that David's private a conquest did not give it status of Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, that's what Rashi says. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, also, originally, Alexandria in Egypt was also, if you saw them duchening, that meant that you could consider them to be a kohen, because there were established based in who would investigate people's lineage. So, whatever all the other details are, one of the things was if they duchen, that's enough to elevate them to a kohen. So if they duchen, that should be allowed to, we could elevate them and say that they're a kohen who could serve in the base of Mikdash. So my lovely yuchsin doesn't mean that they have a high yichus pedigree, and they could even serve in the base of mikdash. So the Gemara says lo l'chala. We are only elevating them enough to eat chala. So the Gemara says hadumi the chilagranus katani, and this makes sense because it's similar to the distribution of grains at the granaries. Ma chilagranus yuchsin, just like they only gave truma produce to kohanim yuchasim of high family pedigree. After siyas kapayim liyuchsin, they would only let if they're duchen, we could assume that they're real kohen for of high family pedigree. So the Gemara says, no, we're comparing distributing truma at the granaries to chala. The suburb truma bizman is at the rabbanon, because this Tana holds that truma nowadays is rabbinic v'chala d'oraisa, and chala is biblical, the opposite of what the previous brisa held. Because we don't know who the Tana is, so it might be a Tana who held this way, and that one might be a Tana who held the other way. That's what we're answering. And the chiddush of this brisa is that the truma, which is only rabbinic, the fact that we see them eating rabbinic truma, we assume that they're a kohen enough that we allow them to eat chala d'oraisa, even though it's more strict. In case they're not really a kohen, there'd be a death penalty involved in eating. But we presume that they're a kohen. What's the difference between chala and truma? How come one of them might be midiraisa and one only might be midrabanan? How come they're not? Chala is a form of truma, so why would they have the same status? Whatever the status of one is, that would be the other. Because Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, once found the Rabbana. The Amar Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua, because Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua said, I found the Rabbanan in the base medrash, and they were sitting and learning. So it means he found them. It makes it sound maybe he went out of town and went to a base medrash that it wasn't his normal base medrash, and this was the sugi they were learning. I don't know exactly. They said even if nowadays truma, the portion which rabbinically is 1/40th, 1/50th, 1/60th that you give to a kohen is rabbinic, chala, when you're making a dough, that portion that you give to a kohen is midiraisa. Because there's a difference between chala and truma. Truma, the Bnei Yisrael weren't required to give until after the Eretz Yisrael was conquered and divided to the Shvatim. So it took Yoshua 14 years to do that. It was 7 years of war, and then it took them 7 years to split the land, and then each Shevet got their portion. So they weren't obligated to give Truma until that time, but Chala, they had to give immediately upon entering Eretz Yisrael before any of the wars. For those 14 years, they had to take chala when they made a dough, but they didn't have to give truma. And I said to them, Adrabah, the opposite makes more sense. So they said, since the obligation to separate chala came before the obligation to separate truma, even in times when we don't have to separate truma, we have to separate chala. That was what the Chachamim were saying to the base medrash. And Rav Huna B'rei Rabbi Yeshua said the opposite. Rav Huna B'rei Rabbi Yeshua said the opposite. He said, "Afilu madamar truma bizman azeh diraisa." Even if truma bizman azeh is biblical, chala drabanan, chala would only be rabbinic. B'voacham el the Tana, because we went to the B'risa, b'voacham el aretz. I think this is in Parsha Shlach. After they got the punishment that they weren't allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael after the punishment of the spies, Hashem gave them a mitzvah. When you come to Eretz Yisrael, separate chala. So it says b'voacham when you come. If it's literally when you come into Eretz Yisrael, maybe when 2 or 3 of the meraglim first step foot in Eretz Yisrael, all of Bnei Yisrael would be chayav to separate chala, even though there was 2 million Jews in Chutz La'aretz and only a few meraglim in Eretz Yisrael. Hamalomar bivoachem, when you with your coming, bevias kochem amarti. So bivoachem, the chem could be plural. You is a plural sense. But he's learning that this Brisa learned it as a contraction, that it's bevias kulchem. So the chem isn't from the possessive you plural, but it's for kulchem, when all of you come. Bevias kulchem amarti. I said that you're only chayv in chala when all of Bnei Yisrael come. But not only part of it. The Chia Siknu Ezra, and when Ezra brought up people to Eretz Yisrael, Lav Kulhu Silu. Not all of them did not come up. So Truma, they had to come because Truma was not dependent on Bias Kochem. But Chala, which is dependent on Bias Kochem, Chala in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah was only Midrabana. And we mentioned this last year when we were learning Truma. The Rambam's opinion isn't so clear. Some feel that the opinion of the Rambam is that you would need Bias Kochem for Kedushas Eretz Yisrael for Shemitah also. This Gemara isn't mashma that way, but there are those who learn the Rambam's opinion is that the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael is Bias Kochem. Hashma. Let's try to prove from another brisa that if someone duchens, we could assume that they're really a kohen. Chazaka lekahuna nesias kapayim b'chilagranos. A chazaka presumption that someone is really a kohen is if they duchen or if they receive truma when people are giving truma from their granaries. The edus, or giving testimony about them that we know that their father was a kohen and their mother was of a high yichus. The Gemara says, Eidos chazaka hiu. Eidos isn't chazaka. Eidos is testimony that's better than chazaka. Chazaka is something you rely on when you don't have better evidence. But Eidos, that's the best evidence you could possibly have. So what do you mean evidence? I mean, why are you listing testimony in terms of evidence? This is what the Brisa means. Nesias kapayim ki Eidos. Dochening is just like Eidos. Ma Eidos liyuchsin af nesias kapayim liyuchsin. Just like Eidos testimony that people tell us that their mother was from a high pedigree family, and the father was for sure a Kohen. He's a Kohen, so duchening is also enough to say that he's a high family yichus pedigree Kohen. It's low. Eidos above mikvah chazaka chazaka. It doesn't mean testimony that people are telling us for sure who his parents are. Only testimony that comes from the strength of chazaka works like chazaka. Meaning, if someone would come to base and says, "We saw meat truma." So testimony telling us that he's eating truma is enough to presume he's a Kohen. It doesn't make him a Kohen for all these things. So that's the only Eidos we're talking about. We're not talking about for sure proof that he's a Kohen. Yehuda also came to Rav Ami. A certain person came to Rav Ami. Amar lei muchzakani b'zeshu Kohen. I have a chazaka that this man's a Kohen. Amar lei Mara Isa. What did you see? How do you know that he's a Kohen? Amar lei said Shakar Rishon b'Beis HaKnesses. He got the first Aliyah in Shul. So the point is, it's not always true that a Kohen gets the first Aliyah. In some places, we don't do this nowadays. But in some places, the biggest Talmid Chacham would get the first Aliyah, even if he wasn't a Kohen. So Rav Ami was wondering, well, how does the fact that he got the first Aliyah mean that he's a Kohen? Maybe it was the Gadol, or maybe there was no Kohen. The Rishonim don't seem to say that, assume that there was no Kohen. I guess they felt there were a lot of Kohanim that wouldn't have become Kohen. So Shakar Akrav Levi. So the person said he got the first Aliyah, and then they called up a Levi after him. If the first person would have been a Kohen, they would have called up a Levi after him. They would have called up another Yisrael. So Rabbi Ami l'kahuna al piv. So Rabbi Ami elevated to a kahuna based on that chazaka. So the chazaka was based on him getting the first Aliyah. Someone told the Beis Din about that. So it doesn't mean that this is, we wouldn't say that he's a Kohen Miyuchas, but we say he's enough of a Kohen that will let him eat Truma. About 9 or 10 lines down from the top, Chafayim and Beis. Now we're 25b2. How the Asa Tamed Rabbi Shimon Levi. Amalei Muksakani B'Zeshu Levi. Someone came to Rabbi Shimon Levi and said, I have a chazaka that this person is a Levi. Amalei Mara Isa. So how do you know? What did you see that makes him a Levi? Now, what exactly is the nafkamina? It's not a big nafkamina. We'll see that it will let him eat meiser. But that's not such a big thing because any non-Kohen is, and even a non-Levi is allowed to eat meiser. So I know that he's a Levi because I saw him get the second Aliyah in the shul, and the second Aliyah goes to a Levi. So b'cheska shu Levi, b'cheska shu gadol. So this wasn't a good enough proof. Rabbi Shua ben Levi felt maybe there was no Kohen that day, or is a place where they always gave the biggest Talmid Chacham Rishon. So the fact that he got Sheni doesn't make him a Levi, because if once you don't call up a Kohen for the first Aliyah, you don't call up a Levi for the second Aliyah. Maybe he's not a Levi, maybe he's Yisrael. So the witness says, Shekar lo fun of Kohen, because the first person who got the Aliyah was a Kohen, and he got second, so that shows that he's a Levi. V'lo Rabbi Shua Levia Alpi, and so Rabbi Shua ben Levi said that he's a Kohen based on this testimony, and not a big consequence, but we let him get Meiser Rishon, the first tithe. The second tithe goes to a Levi, and then the Levi has to take 10% of that, give it to a Kohen, Trumas Meiser, and then the second tithe, which is in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, we have to eat in Yerushalayim, and in the third and sixth years, the second Meiser isn't the second Meiser, it's Meiser Ani. It's the tithe that doesn't go to the Levi, but it goes to poor people. How the Asa made Reish Lakish? Someone came to Reish Lakish. Amar le muchzakani b'zeh Kohen. I have a chazaka that this person is a Kohen. Amar le Mara Isa. Reish Lakish says, "What's your evidence? Why do you think he has a chazaka?" Shakara Rishon basic analysis, because he got the first Aliyah and Shul. Amar le Reish Lakish says, did you see that he would go to the granaries to collect truma? Meaning, because Reish Lakish said there's other reasons why someone could get Rishon. That's not enough to say that he's a Kohen. But if he was collecting truma from the granaries, that's a better proof that he's a Kohen. Amar Rabbi Lazar, so Rabbi Lazar says, "V'i ein shem goren batla kahuna." So Rabbi Lazar says, if there's no granaries in that area, you're going to say he's not a Kohen. Let him be considered a Kohen from the fact that he gets the first Aliyah and there's a Levi after him. Meaning, Reish Lakish wanted to be stricter than just the fact that he got the first Aliyah. And Rabbi Lazar says, don't be so strict. Now, what's the significance of Rabbi Lazar? Zimnin Habiyasu Kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Another time, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Lazar were learning from Rabbi Yochanan. A similar incident came before Rabbi Yochanan. So, meaning someone said, I think so and so is a Kohen. And he said, how do you know this? And he said, because he got the first Aliyah in Shul. And Rabbi Yochanan didn't ask about him collecting truma from the granaries. So Reish Lakish realized that this incident had happened another time before also, and Rabbi Lazar learned from Rabbi Yochanan that this was the halacha. So Amalei Reish Lakish Risiv Shechil Galagoren. Reish Lakish piped up and said, well, shouldn't we have to tell if he collected truma when they were distributing truma from the granaries? That would be a better proof that he's a Kohen. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, the same exact phrase. If there's no granary, we won't have Kohanim anymore. We don't need to use that as an evidence. And so probably from the fact that Reish Lakish used, that Rabbi Yochanan used the same exact phrase that Rabbi Lazar used, Reish Lakish realized that Rabbi Lazar heard Rabbi Yochanan paskin this way. The Hadar Chazil Rabbi Lachad Bishus, Rabbi Reish Lakish was figuratively staring daggers at Rabbi Lazar. Amar leishmat mili Barnafcha below Amar lebishmei. You heard something from the blacksmith. One opinion is that Barnafcha is a blacksmith because Rabbi Yochanan was a blacksmith, and you didn't tell it to me in his name. So, meaning Rabbi Lazar, Reish Lakish thought Rabbi Lazar was saying his own svara that someone getting the first Aliyah is enough to say that he's a Kohen, and he didn't say that he heard the halacha from Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish is very upset that Rabbi Lazar didn't say it over in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia. There was an incident with Rabbi and Reb Chia. Chad hela ben al pivav l'kuhuna, v'chad hela achal pivav achal l'kuhuna. So one said a certain boy was a Kohen. Maybe he was an adult boy already, but a boy based on what his father said. His father said, "I'm a Kohen. He's a Kohen too." Meaning, it's possible that the father married a divorcee or someone that wouldn't make the kid kosher enough to be a Kohen. But so if that happened, the father wouldn't want to make it look bad on himself, right? So could we trust the father? This is like what you were asking last week, Marty. He's testifying about himself. How can we have any credibility? So one of them allowed a son of someone else to be a Kohen based on what the father said, and one of them allowed someone to be a Kohen based on what his brother said. Now the brother is not. There is a negia, but maybe they're only half brothers with the same father. So even though we don't allow brothers to testify about brothers, it would be worse to believe a father about his son, than a brother about his brother, because it might only be half brothers. So maybe he doesn't have as much of an incentive to mislead us from the truth. If he's saying it, it's more credible than a father saying it about his son, meaning about what he himself did. So let's conclude that the opinion so we didn't know which one Rabbi said, which one Rabbi said, but let's prove from the following incident that Rabbi is the one who believed the father and then classified the son as a coin based on what the father said. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, Reisha Bava Amar Ben Yizev a coin. Someone came and said, "This is my son, and he's a coin." Nemelachil b'truma. So we believe the father. We let the kid eat truma ve'eno nemelachil isha, but we don't let him marry someone of high yichus, because we don't want to waste someone of high yichus on someone who's not really a kohen who could serve in the mizbeach. Divrei Rebbe. These are opinions of Rebbe. Amar Reb Chia said to him, if you believe in enough to let him eat truma, let him believe to marry a kohen. And if you don't believe the father to the extent that we would let him be a full kohen, to marry someone of untainted lineage, you shouldn't let him eat truma either. Either believe him all the way or don't believe him all the way. That's what Reb Chia said. Amrlo, Rabbi answered, I let him eat truma because the father, by saying this is my son, he's a kohen, means that the father's also a kohen. So the father would have truma. So the father can give him truma to eat. But I am not believing him to let the son marry a kohen because the father is not allowed to marry off his son. The father's allowed to marry off his minor daughter on the Torah level, but not a son. So to believe him to the extent of something that the father has the ability to do, which is feed him truma, but not about marrying an unblemished woman. So we said, yes, this is a good conclusion to show that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi allowed someone to be a kohen based on what his father said. Oh, it was only. Oh, so Reb Chia did something much less innovative. He let someone be considered a Levi based on what his brother said. So it wasn't a Kohen. It was not nearly as consequential as making someone a Kohen. Chia Maishna ben Midalo. Why would Reb Chia not believe the son from the father, but a brother from a brother he will? The carbohydrates 11. A son is a relative to the father. So we don't believe the father of the son or the son testifying of the father. But a brother is also a relative to a brother. So why would he believe a brother in regard to a brother if the problem is we don't trust a close relative? They're both close relatives. You shouldn't trust either of them. So the Gemara answers, this was a case where he wasn't coming and making a declaration as if he's telling us something important. He said it in an off-the-cuff manner in a way where he had no reason to lie. Now, what's the case of Messiah Tumo? We don't pass like this, but according to Sephardim, if milk fell into chicken soup, and it was more than a ratio of 1:60, it was only 1/50th. You could ask an expert chef to taste the chicken soup, and you say, if you taste milk in the chicken soup, we can't eat it because it's milk and meat. But if you don't taste any milk in the chicken soup, we're still allowed to eat the chicken soup. Because even though milk fell in, it's not enough that imparted a taste into the chicken soup. Ashkenazim, we're strict unless we don't trust people to taste it, and we use 1/60th. So even though there may not be a taste if it's 1/59, but we're not lenient. But the question is, normally non-Jews don't have credibility. We don't let a non-Jew give testimony over most halachos. So why are we trusting a non-Jew for this? So the answer is he's an important chef. You got one of these guys from one of the cooking shows on TV. You have a huge reputation. If he wouldn't tell you the truth, he's going to risk his very big reputation. So because his reputation would be damaged if he would lie, that induces him to tell the truth. However, the halacha is, if you tell someone they casually mention it and not in the context where they would lie, you could also trust them. the fact that that they're saying something, literally means they're talking through their innocence, meaning they don't know that anything important is reliant on what their response is going to be. So that also allows us to give them credibility. So in this case, the brother was talking about being a Levi, not because he wanted to declare his brother a Levi. He said, I do this and blah, 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 blah. And from talking, we understood he's a Levi. So because it happened innocently and not as a case of a declaration, so we believe it. Yihad Am Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, as Rabbi Yehuda said to Shmuel, there's a certain person, he wasn't saying to declare himself a Kohen. He was just saying, this happened once. I remember when I was young and I was taking on my father took me on his shoulders. So Rashi points out he put on the shoulders because they didn't want the kid to start digging around in the dirt where there might be rats or other creepy creatures. He took me out of school. Tosos points out that a slave of a Kohen is also allowed to eat truma. For the fact that he went to school showed that he was not a slave. He was the man's son. He took off my coat because we're worried the coat was tamei. And he dunked me in the mikvah so that I could eat truma in the evening. Because to eat truma, going to mikvah is enough. You need shkia. You need sunset after you go to the mikvah. And then you're allowed to eat truma. So, because he was saying the story, this happened, he wasn't coming to say, I am a Kohen. He's saying, I remember that this happened, so that shows that he's a Kohen. So we believe him, even though a person doesn't have credibility for himself, but the context and the way he said it over was speaking through innocence, not a way of making declaration, so that gives himself more credibility. Reb Chia, when he said over this incident, he gave the following ending. My friends would separate from me. They called me Yochanan who eats chalos, meaning the special truma loaves. Rabbi Lakuna al Piv. And Rabbi Huda Nasi made this person a Kohen based on his own recollection, which he had declared out of innocence as Mesiach Pituma. So we'll end here for today.